Regardless of whether it's Donald Trump or Joe Biden who is ultimately elected president, the question naturally arises, where do we libertarians go from here? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's segment of the Libertarian Angle as we address that question. Hi, I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's segment of the Libertarian Angle, the show that brings you the principled and compromising case for libertarianism in the context of the burning issues of the day. I'm joined, as I am every week, by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
Great to be with you, our viewers and listeners, in these, as the ancient Chinese curse says, may you live in interesting times.
Yeah, these are definitely interesting times. If you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org for 30 years of principled, uncompromising articles and perspectives and videos and conferences on libertarianism, and subscribe to this YouTube channel. Okay, Richard, so we're here recording this. We still don't know who the president is. It's a razor-thin margin. But regardless, I mean, doesn't this mean that we're now achieving freedom in America? I mean, this shows you the democratic system in action. The voters are getting their say. It's going to be a close result regardless. But man, freedom is here, right?
Well, you've persuaded me. No problem. I guess we can end the segment right there.
Right. We can end the Future Freedom Foundation, the libertarian movement. I mean, we've arrived. Well, the question naturally arises, what do we libertarians do at this point? Whether it's Biden who's elected president or Trump who's elected president, does it make a difference as to which one is elected president in terms of where do we go from here as a libertarian movement? I mean, obviously, things are pretty bad when you look at the state of freedom in America. When you and I were first starting FFF back 30 years ago, I mean, we knew things were bad at that point. But looking back on it now, I mean, those are kind of like nice days with respect to what we're trying to achieve, because as each year and as each decade has gone by, things have definitely gotten worse. And we're now at a state where things are as bad as they've ever been in this country with respect to freedom. I mean, things were bad enough before the coronavirus crisis, but boy, that they have seized upon that crisis, as you know, to destroy whatever we have left of freedom. But even before that, the 9/11 attacks with the Patriot Act and the mass secret surveillance and the power of assassination, and then you got the massive welfare state, Social Security, Medicare, the entitlements, the IRS. I mean, this is not exactly what the framers had in mind when they brought this country into existence, the federal government into existence. We're living in some what I would say are very tyrannical and oppressive state of affairs here. And so what do we do here? Where do we go? Do we throw in the towel and we say, oh, it's just too big? Look at all the statists who supported both Trump and Biden enthusiastically. That how would we ever surmount this type of thing? Then maybe it's time to join up with them, or maybe it's even time to join up with the reform-minded libertarians, that big segment of the libertarian movement that just advocates reform, health savings accounts, Social Security, privatization, school vouchers, and income tax reform, and so forth, and call it freedom, call it libertarianism, and just resign ourselves to our lives as serfs. And I say that's the worst thing we could do. In fact, if you go back to, let's say, 1890, and you look at the state of affairs in America then, no income tax, no IRS, no Federal Reserve, no immigration controls, no Pentagon, CIA, NSA, foreign interventionism, foreign wars, foreign empire, economic regulations, minimum wage laws, paper money, fiat money. I mean, you could go on and on and on, public schooling and so forth. If you were a statist at that point, which was really what the progressive movement was doing, I mean, that would be reason for to be depressed and despondent, saying, oh, we don't have a chance. There's no way to move the country in our direction. How are we going to get them to support an income tax when they don't have an income tax, or a Federal Reserve when they don't have a Federal Reserve? How are we going to do this? Well, they just doubled down. I mean, they persisted. They believed in the power of ideas. And within a relatively short period of time, they were moving the country in their direction with minimum wage laws and maximum hour laws and child labor laws. And then it finally just culminates with total success in the 1930s with the Great Depression. So they showed the power of ideas to move people in a bad direction, but nonetheless, the power of ideas. And that's where we come in as libertarians. We've got to keep on keeping on. We got to be persistent. We have to be just as persistent as they are, because we have the potential, despite how bad things are today, because things are as bad today as they were good in 1890, we have that potential of shifting the country in a different direction. And we have the advantage that people have lived under this system now for decades. They can see the consequences, the crises, the chaos, the perpetual conflict and chaos, crises that come with the welfare state and the warfare state. And having seen those, a lot of them thinks it's freedom. They've been indoctrinated into thinking it's freedom. But here come us libertarians to say, no, this is not a free society. Here is what a free society is. And that's where the adherence to principle comes in. That we've got to continue adhering to principle instead of joining up with this siren song of reform. Let's reform this program, let's reform that program, that characterizes, unfortunately, much of the libertarian movement. That by raising people's vision to a higher level, this is the way out of this morass. And we can't surrender to despondency and despair. This is the time to double down and become even more determined to shift the country in our direction. What do you think?
Well, let me start where you started off, and that is where we were 30 years ago. In the 1990s, what were we most concerned about? A president in the Oval Office, who had a very hands-on intern, and it got him into trouble, and he had to defend himself. I never had sexual relations with that woman. And it got him into trouble in impeachment. And then, it was such bad times that we had such a divided government that there were 4 years of budget surpluses. And the Keynesian activists were saying, oh, we could have surpluses unendingly. Then there'll be no government debt for the Federal Reserve to monetize. They'll pay off the debt. How can we have our activist monetary and fiscal policy if all the debt is paid off? And these were our concerns. It's almost like nostalgia. Where's Bill Clinton when we need him? But the fact is that beneath all this, gridlock that was going on because the Republicans controlled both houses of Congress for a good part of the time when Clinton was president, and you had the circus with his impeachment over supposedly lying about his relationship with the intern. The fact is that what were the issues that we were concerned about? We were concerned about growth in government, increasing regulation of the economy, the fact that America was, other than these episodes in Somalia, was not particularly yet actively involved in a lot of foreign wars, but our bases were everywhere, with huge contingents of U.S. military personnel stationed on virtually every continent on the face of the earth. And our conservative friends were still adamant in preventing any reform of drug laws or other victimless crimes, and we were concerned about that. But what has happened in the meantime since then? Well, we have had George W. Bush, and we've had Barack Obama, and now we've had what's his name? Donald Trump, and we might have Joe Biden as president soon. And what have we witnessed during the remainder of the last 30 years? unending foreign wars as represented by Afghanistan and Iraq, and our episodes in Syria and Libya and other places. We have seen an explosion of the national debt. We have seen an immense growth of government, both on domestic and military spending because of these wars, and unending deficits, annual deficits that are creating this immense debt. We now have a national debt of over $27 trillion. And the Congressional Budget Office says that that's going to continue at about $1 trillion a year deficits as far as the eye can see, looking over between now and 2050. And we see more and more people seeming to be complacent about the growth and intrusiveness of the domestic welfare state. So then we come to the very issue that you're raising. What do we do now? The fact is that whether Trump somehow pulls a rabbit out of the hat, either with votes still being counted or some court decisions and gets reelected, or as most likely seems to be the case, Joe Biden will be his successor in the White House. The fact is that we are in a situation today where if trends do not change, whether it's certainly if a Democrat, given their ideological, implicit ideological collectivism and socialism and elitist central planning of virtually everything, or just the Republican version of it, which is just all of that slightly light with a less disturbing rhetoric part of the time. The country is moving in directions of more government control, more government intervention, more government redistribution, more government debt, more government bankruptcy at some point. What does this therefore require of us? Now, as you were suggesting, there are some who say, well, you have to go along to get along. And that is certainly our conservative cousins in the Republican movement, but also many of our libertarian ideological brothers and sisters who have seemed to believe that you cannot make the case for liberty. And I would differ with that. And I'm going to pick up on a theme that you also raised, Jacob. A good number of years ago, I wrote a piece on, suppose that you were a young Marxist in 1883, living in London, and your hero had just died. That's when Karl Marx died. And you were there at the funeral with him, with just about a dozen people at his gravesite to bid him farewell, and half of those are his family members. And you saw all around you in the 1880s a thriving, vibrant, limited government, free enterprise, free trade, individual liberty, limited government environment, both in that Great Britain of that time, pretty much, as well as certainly on the other side of the Atlantic in the United States. You could easily, therefore, conclude as this young, naive, true-believing socialist with his hero having into the ground that the cause of socialist revolution and societal transformation was unreachable. Fast forward to the 1930s, the 1940s, and rather than an obscure and dead movement, the socialist creed and all variations on it grew and prospered. Why? Because no matter how difficult and pessimistic the particular times and circumstance seemed to be, those young socialists of the late 19th century truly believed in their ideal of a better world. Did they compromise? Did they give in? Did they try to get along to go along? No. So what they did is they basically said, we must continue to explain what is wrong with contemporary capitalist society. We must persuade people that reforms only go so far, that there has to be a transformation of the society, a revolutionary collectivist transformation of the society, preferably through balance, as in this with the Russian Revolution, through bullets. But we have a vision of a transformative new society. And that dedication, that determination, that unwillingness to compromise in any way, shape, and form resulted in, in a willingness to fight regardless of the circumstances. Now, we're in this situation today. We look around the world, and in fact, both liberal democracy, as understood by classical liberals, and the free society, in any way, shape, and form, is not succeeding. The growth of the state, the growth of intrusion, the growth of control. Are we to be as pessimistic? Are we to be despondent? No. I would suggest, as you were saying, we need to hunker down and redouble our efforts. Because this is a dead end. Do we want to be like Cuba? Do we want to be like Venezuela? Do we want to be just even like Greece a few years ago, when they had to go begging from the EU partners to bail them out with Band-Aid aid? Well, there's nobody going to bail out the United States if we follow this road. Who's going to bail us out? Saturn, Neptune, Venus, Mars? Okay? There is an end to the road to this. Like causes bring about like effects. Bad economic policies bring about bad social consequences. There is a vision of a free society, a society in which individuals have the dignity and the latitude and the liberty to live their lives peacefully as they want and have a vision to do so, interacting with their fellow human beings through voluntary and peaceful and honest association and trade for the mutual benefit of all, in which if government exists, it secures liberty and does not violate liberty. Now, to my mind, that is a vision, that is a conception, that is an ideal for a moral, good, and prosperous society. We cannot afford for that to die. That requires each and every one of us to not be disheartened, not be depressed, not go off into a little corner in sort of a sense of it's all hopeless. It always seems to be darkest before the dawn, to use that cliche. But it is true. There is nothing inevitable. There's no irreversible trends. It's all a matter of ideas, belief, confidence, and willingness to try. If we do that, liberty can have a chance and can very well triumph. But that requires each and every one of us to take a little bit of responsibility and burden on our shoulders to be willing to fight and defend it.
Yeah, to add to your cliches, when the tough gets going, that when the going gets tough, the tough get going. And it's interesting that you mentioned the drug war. You know, back in 1990, before the internet, of course, long before the internet, one of the means of communication we used was, as you'll recall, radio talk shows. I mean, it was a huge phenomenon. Talk shows all across the country, both on the left and the right. It was phenomenal. And people would call in with comments, and the host would have guests. And I loved doing these things. And I always knew that if I wanted to light up the phones, all I'd have to do is say, legalize drugs. Because really, libertarians were the only ones calling for drug legalization. As you recall, Milton Friedman was calling for drug legalization back in, I think, in 1972 in a Newsweek article. Then in 1990, he had that famous open letter to Bill Bennett, the so-called drug czar, saying, let's end the drug war. Well, as you know, and you'll recall, our very first year, one of our monthly issues of Freedom Daily, which what our monthly journal was called at the time, was entirely devoted to the drug war. And I could light up the phones by doing that. People would call in. They were so outraged. I dare you suggest this. And then legalizing heroin and cocaine. And I'd say, of course. And that they would be shocked, just shocked. You know, even marijuana would shock them, but legalize all drugs, it was a stunner. Well, we could have succumbed despair and despondency and say, oh, we better stay off this issue. This is not good. People are they're attacking us. But instead, we stuck by our guns. And most of the libertarian movement was pretty good on the drug war. Just legalize everything, and at the very least legalize marijuana. Well, now look, 30 years later, look what the people of Oregon have done. They decriminalized all drugs, not just marijuana, but heroin and cocaine as well. It shows you that ideas matter. Now, for some reason, there's a segment of the libertarian movement that, while they're very good on the drug war, they're just horrible on the welfare state. They're scared to death to call for the repeal, the immediate repeal of the so-called entitlement programs, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, education grants. They call for a 50-year phase out, even though they never called for a 50-year phase out of the drug war. They still don't. And I think this is a time for reevaluation. When you hit crises like this, and you have a big moment like this, a national election where you've got two statists running against each other, actually 4 against 4, if you throw Pence and Harris into the mix. And from our perspective, it really doesn't make a whole lot of difference whether Trump or Biden is elected. Either way, they're going to go in bad directions. Here in Virginia, we elected a Democratic governor, and both houses of the legislature became Democrat, and they immediately enacted one of the most stringent gun control laws in the country. And you know darn well what's going to happen with Biden. They're going to go on their big spending binge like they always do. They're going to try to get more government spending, more debasement of the currency. We already know what we're going to get with 4 more years of Trump. With both candidates, we're going to get foreign interventionism out the gazoo. So what we really need to do as libertarians, and I would challenge every libertarian here in this country, is take the same position with respect to freedom in general that we take with respect to the drug war. That just identify what are the infringements, and then we all come together and call for their dismantling, their removal, because that's the only way you're going to achieve freedom. If you leave an infringement intact and all you do is reform it, you haven't achieved freedom. I don't care if you call it libertarian or a free market approach to health care or Social Security privatization. It's not freedom. You're just fooling yourself and you're fooling other people. That's just a statist reform. It's like slavery. If all you had done is reform slavery with fewer lashings and better work conditions, you could call it libertarian and a free market approach to slavery all you wanted, but it would be nothing of the sort. Freedom means the dismantling of slavery, and it means the dismantling of serfdom. And that's what we have. That was the title of Hayek's famous book, The Road to Serfdom. Well, we traveled that road and we arrived there. We arrived at a serfdom society. And this is why it's imperative that we continue. If we want freedom, we have to identify what is each infringement on freedom and then make the principal case for removing it. Is that easy? Of course not. But there's no shortcuts. You can't say, oh, well, no, Jake, I'm going to do a incremental or a gradualist approach here, because that's a never proposition. That's just a cop-out, that because it's difficult to make the principal case for, say, separating school and state, as compared to the easy case of, hey, let's have a voucher program that'll improve the public schools and keep them intact. That's why it's imperative, if we're going to achieve freedom, that we maintain this strict adherence to principle.
Well, the thing is that it's basically poo-poo, this idea of a principled approach, because they say people don't want to listen, it's too extreme. But picking up exactly what you said, the fact is, if you go to the late 18th or beginning of the 19th century, the idea of abolishing slavery at one fell swoop must have seemed absurd. The fact is, slavery was ended throughout the British Empire through an act of parliament in 1833. Many other countries ended slavery this way. But it required a determination to, well, maybe we can just sort of ease out of slavery over 50 years. It requires a root and branch approach by saying, does one human being have a right to own another? The same thing applied to the free trade movement in Great Britain, the Anti-Corn Law League led by Richard Cobden and John Bright. Were they happy if they could pass through the Parliament of Great Britain a particular lowering of a tariff or the elimination of a particular tariff? Of course, they didn't turn down that. but both in their demonstrations and in their movement and getting people elected to parliament, their goal and their purpose was the abolition of it. And in fact, admittedly, because of a economic crisis of the time, in the spring of 1846, through an act of parliament, June of 1846, all of the agricultural restrictions on freedom of trade were gone by one act of unilaterally, no mutual trade agreements, unilaterally. These were triumphs of the pursuit of a principle and an ideal. Now, what about the founding fathers and the establishment of a free America? Did the founding fathers say to the the British King, King George III, well, maybe if you could give us, a little bit of independence, but not complete independence? They weren't going to do that. They said that we tried our grievances, we tried to petition you, we bent over backwards, but the fact now comes, a moment comes when it's either freedom or living under what we view as your tyranny of control and taxation. These are these momentous choices and decisions that have to be made. And they achieve their ends. But as I said, and as you were saying, what is necessary is the determination to believe in the ideal, to understand why the ideal is good and right and just in the relationships among human beings, that is a free society, and then to be willing to learn the arguments and articulate the arguments and defend the arguments in every corner of our life. You and I do writing, we do these kind of videos. Other people are in different facets of life. You talk to your coworkers, you talk with family members over a holiday dinner, you write a letter to the editor, you're sitting around with a beer with friends and politics comes up. You're not rude, you're not pushy, you're not a know-it-all. People get turned off by that. But certainly if you're in a conversation and these political issues come up and the circumstances seem right and you feel comfortable enough about it, you have to be willing to say, I believe in liberty. And these other people who are advocating X, Y, and Z, is this really what freedom is? Do you want to live like this? Is this the future you want for your children? Because if you don't, then this is the kind of free society we need. And if we thought about it, this is what it would have to look like if we really wanted it.
Yeah, and it takes an understanding of what freedom is. And I'm recalling Leonard Reed when Reed would talk about the importance of self-improvement when it comes to freedom. Is that work on yourself, work on studying freedom, studying the arguments, and then being able to expound on them. Your point about just daily conversations or like a letter to the editor. It's so easy to say, oh, people won't like me if I call for abolishing public schools or Social Security or something. I need to trim my sails here. I need to accomplish something minor here because otherwise people will reject me. Well, that's what takes confidence in your philosophy and your ideas that comes with understanding and study. The more you understand the free market, the more you understand that there's nothing to fear, that freedom works, that really does work, that you could get rid of the drug war today. It'd be the greatest thing in the world, or the welfare state today, or the warfare state. That all these things would end up with a tremendous bounty. And we've seen that time and time again. I mean, the best thing that ever happened to slaves was the immediate end of slavery, rather than the gradual repeal of it or gradual end of it. So there's got to be an understanding of freedom, and that's where we come in, is sharing this understanding. But there's also got to be a trust. You got to trust freedom. And when I see all these libertarians calling for reform, to me, what they're really saying is they don't trust freedom. And so they have to make the case for this minor reform, or even if it's a major reform, that leaves the infringement intact because they themselves have doubts as to whether freedom will work. Well, again, that goes back to understanding. Once you understand how the market operates and how freedom operates and how people interact with each other and the spontaneous order that Friedrich Hayek talked about, then all of a sudden you have a total trust in freedom. You say, no, let's just get rid of all these programs immediately, the same way we got rid of slavery immediately, and then you see the spontaneous order and freedom erupting. As Reed used to say, let freedom reign. and then experience the wonders and the bounties of a free society.
Ask yourself, do you see the same type of hesitancies or concerns by those, as we usually define it, on the left? No. Do you get into a conversation with someone of that persuasion and they say, well, maybe we can have just a little bit government healthcare. No, we need to have socialized medicine. Well, maybe we just need a little corner of government regulation. No, business is evil and it's got to be under the thumb of government. Otherwise, they're going to be bad, selfish people. Well, maybe we just need a little bit of welfare to help it. No, people cannot be left alone. We need to have a system of massive safety nets for everyone, and you have to pay for it. Oh, that's why they succeed, okay? That's why they succeed. They have no hesitancy, no doubts. They have confidence, and they're not willing to be in your face. Now, I'm not saying to be rude and pushy like them. I really want to emphasize that. Another theme of Leonard Read's is that never push back with the same rudeness or crudeness that often people on the other side use. Be gentle, polite, courteous, and civilized in all that you do. And I totally agree with him, but within that, there can be a calm certitude. There can be a deliberative confidence and exposition of principle. And that is what we need to have in ourselves if we're going to succeed.
Yeah, and I think we are going to succeed. I just have a strong hunch that the libertarian movement is ultimately going to pull America out of this. Because let's face it, Richard, libertarianism is the only philosophy that is viable. It's the only philosophy that's moral. It's the only philosophy that is the solution to the crises and the conflict and the chaos and the disharmony that afflicts our land. I mean, this is what can lead America to liberty and peace, prosperity and harmony with the world. And I think as people start to reason this through and they start to reflect on it, they're going to start joining up with us. And then that's what brings that critical mass. But it all takes an adherence to principle. So, okay, on that note, we run out of time. And Richard, enjoyed the conversation as always. And
me too. And I just looking forward to another opportunity next week. But I just want to close. But, ideas do have consequences. But ideas can only have consequences if they're understood and articulated and persuasively presented to others. Otherwise, you keep it within yourself and you don't get to share it or not willing to share it with others to bring about slowly but surely at some point and in some way the transformation to a good and decent and just society that I think many of us really would like to see achieved.
Okay, on that fine note, we'll wrap it up. And if you're new to FFF, come and visit us at fff.org. Subscribe to our FFF Daily and also to our monthly journal, Future of Freedom. You can see that on the subscribe page of our website. And subscribe to our YouTube channel. So, Richard, see you next week.
Until next time.